"I need you, baby," she said softly to her granddaughter after being slapped by a disrespectful heiress. A grand soul estate, floor-to-ceiling glass, powerful silence, and in the corner of an opulent hallway, an elderly black woman in a maid's uniform, standing perfectly still, hands folded, eyes low, the way a person stands when they have spent decades making themselves small so others could feel large. Her name was Henrietta, and she had given this family 31 years. 31 years of early mornings and silent evenings. 31 years of yes ma'am and no ma'am, and stepping aside in hallways she had cleaned with her own hands. 31 years of swallowing things that should never have been swallowed. Then came a Tuesday morning in March. A vase slipped. Crystal hit marble. And before the echo had even settled, the sound of a hand across a face. A gasp from the staff. Then silence again. The woman who did it adjusted her sleeve. Seo Yun, heiress to a billion-dollar empire. She didn't look back. She never looked back. That was the whole problem. She walked out of that hallway certain of one thing, that nothing in her world was about to change. But down in the lobby, sitting in a chair with a notebook in her lap and absolutely nothing to prove, was a young woman who had flown 11 hours to be there. She wasn't there for a job interview. She wasn't there to plead or beg or make a scene. She was there to take everything. Her full name was Henrietta May Collins, 68 years old, originally from Atlanta, Georgia. The kind of woman who ironed her uniform every single morning even when her hands ached. Even when no one noticed. Even when no one said thank you. She came to South Korea in 1993. Followed her husband, Raymond, who had taken a position as private aide to one of Seoul's oldest and most powerful industrial families, the Kangs. Raymond was a quiet, precise man, loyal to his core. And the Kang patriarch, Chairman Byung-ho, recognized that immediately. When Raymond passed, too young, too suddenly, Chairman Byung-ho did something that no contract required and no one expected. He sat with Henny for 3 hours in his private study. He made her tea himself. He told her that Raymond had been more than staff, that he had been trusted, that she was welcome to stay, not as charity, but as family. Those were his words. As family. What Henny did not know, what she would not learn until years later, after Diana was gone and Layla had found the documents in a box of her mother's things, was that Byung-ho's debt to this family ran deeper than loyalty. Raymond had known. He had always known. And he had never said a word. And so Henny stayed. She cooked. She cleaned. She helped raise children who would one day forget her name. She learned enough Korean to navigate the markets, to comfort crying toddlers, to exchange warm words with the groundskeeper on cold mornings. She built a life inside those walls, quiet and entirely her own. In her room, which was small and tucked at the far end of the east corridor, there was one photograph on the wall. Henny younger, holding a baby girl wrapped in a yellow blanket. Her daughter. The photo was worn at the edges from being taken down and held, which she did on certain nights more than she would ever admit. That daughter was gone now too. Left behind a child of her own, a granddaughter. Layla, 29 years old, living in Chicago. Sharp, composed, and completely devoted to the grandmother who had helped raise her over summers and long-distance phone calls and every Sunday video call without exception. It was on one of those Sunday calls, 3 weeks before the Tuesday in March, that Layla noticed something. A bruise. On Henny's left wrist. Pale yellow-green, the kind that had already been there a few days. Henny laughed it off before Layla could finish the sentence. "I bumped the cart in the kitchen, baby. You know how clumsy I get." She changed the subject. Asked about Layla's work. Asked if she was eating properly. Layla let it go. She shouldn't have, but she did. Because that was the thing about Henny. She had spent years making sure the people who loved her didn't worry. She had mastered the art of being fine, of seeming settled, of carrying weight without letting it show in her face. She told herself the family needed her. The truth was quieter than that. She needed them. Because that house, those walls, that kitchen, that east corridor, was the last place on earth she still felt close to Raymond. Close to the man who had brought her here. close to the version of herself that had once been held. She never complained, not once in all the years she had given them. And then one evening in late February, she returned to her room after dinner service to find an envelope on the floor. Slid under the door. No knock. No conversation. No name on the front. She opened it slowly. A termination letter. 30 days notice. Effective immediately upon the period's end. No reason given. No signature she recognized. Just a reference number and a legal department stamp. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. The photograph on the wall. The yellow blanket. Raymond's voice somewhere in the back of her memory. She folded the letter, placed it on the nightstand, and the next morning, she ironed her uniform. Same as always. But something had shifted. Something quiet and irreversible. And the following Sunday, for the first time in 29 years of that child's life, Henny picked up the phone and said 4 words she had never once said before. I need you, baby. To understand what happened in that hallway, you have to understand who Seo-Yun was. Not the version she performed for boardrooms and press photos. The real version. The one the household staff knew by the sound of her heels on marble from 2 corridors away. Kang Seo-Yun, 34 years old. The only daughter of Chairman Byung-ho's second wife. A woman who had married into the Kang name with precision and left it with considerable assets and very little warmth. Seo-Yun had inherited her mother's eye for leverage and her father's name. That combination, in the wrong hands, becomes something very specific. Something that looks like confidence from a distance and reveals itself as cruelty up close. Whatever Seo-Yun was, she was not careless. She had watched her father run this company for 20 years and had understood, even as a child, that the difference between power and the performance of power was whether it held under pressure. She had spent 18 months holding it. The board fractured. The share price bleeding. Contracts waiting for signatures that only she could give. She had held it. That was real. What she could not seem to do, what she had never in 34 years been taught to do, was hold it without making someone smaller in the process. When Chairman Byung-ho passed just over 2 years before that Tuesday in March, the Kongstar Holdings board needed an interim. There was no confirmed successor. No publicly designated heir. The succession charter required a formal vote, but votes take time, and companies don't pause for grief. So Seo-Yun stepped in, acting CEO. Temporary in title. In practice, she moved like the position was already permanent. She redecorated the chairman's office within the first week. The staff noticed that. They noticed everything. They always do. From the day Seo-Yun took over the household, long before she took over the company, Henny had been managed like an inconvenience. Not fired, not confronted directly, simply reduced. Her name disappeared from Seo-Yun's vocabulary entirely. She became the American. As in, tell the American the dining room needs resetting. As in, why does the American still have a room on this floor? As in, the American accent is really something, isn't it? Said at a dinner table with guests present, with a light laugh that invited others to join in. Some of them did, because that is what people do when power is in the room and it is laughing. There was a dinner, a formal one. 8 board members and their partners gathered around the Kang estate's long table. An evening designed to project stability, to say to the people who held voting shares that everything was fine, that the company was in steady hands, that the transition was seamless. The food was exceptional. A board member, one of the senior ones, a man who had known Chairman Byung-ho for decades, paused mid-meal and said it aloud. Paid a genuine compliment to whoever had prepared it. Seo-Yun didn't miss a beat. The old maid made it. Don't give her too much praise, she'll ask for a raise. Laughter moved around the table. Not all of it, but enough. Henny was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. She had heard every word. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned and went back to the kitchen and finished her work. That was February. 3 weeks later came March. The vase was a Joseon-era Celadon piece. Irreplaceable. It had sat on the same console table in the East Corridor for as long as anyone at the estate could remember. Henny had dusted it hundreds of times. Carefully, methodically, the way she did everything. On that Tuesday morning, a cleaning cart caught the edge of the console. The vase tilted. Henny reached for it, and missed by half a second. The sound of it hitting the floor brought 3 staff members into the corridor within moments. And then Seo Yun appeared. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Seo Yun's hand was already moving before the last fragment of celadone had stopped sliding across the marble. Open palm. Full force. Across Henny's left cheek. The corridor went absolutely silent. A junior housekeeper, 19 years old, 3 months into the job, pressed both hands over her mouth and began to cry. Silently. The way you cry when you are terrified of being noticed. Seo Yun straightened, adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. Pack your things when the 30 days are done, and you'll be replacing that vase from your final paycheck. She walked away. Henny stood in the corridor. Alone. A broken piece of irreplaceable history at her feet. The side of her face burning. She did not cry. Not there. Not in front of them. She bent down, and she began picking up the pieces. That night, in her small room at the end of the east corridor, under the photograph with the worn edges and the yellow blanket, she picked up her phone. And for the first time in her granddaughter's entire life, Henrietta May Collins asked for help. Layla Collins booked her flight 40 minutes after she hung up the phone. No hesitation. No back and forth. No let me think about it or let me check my schedule. Her grandmother had never asked her for anything in 29 years. That fact alone told her everything she needed to know about how serious it was. She packed 1 bag. Carry-on only. Dark slacks, 2 shirts, a structured blazer, a pair of flat shoes built for long days. No jewelry. No excess. A notebook, the kind with a hard cover and a strap, tucked under her arm at every airport she moved through. She traveled the way people travel when they are not going on a trip. When they are going to handle something. 11 hours in the air. She didn't watch the in-flight entertainment. She wrote. Pages of it. Neat, close handwriting in a notebook that, if anyone had been able to read over her shoulder, would have raised serious questions about exactly who Layla Collins was and what she actually did for a living. She landed in Seoul on a Thursday morning. Took a car directly to the Kong estate. Didn't check into a hotel first. Didn't eat. Went straight there. The gate guard saw a young woman in plain clothes with a single bag and a notebook. He smiled, the efficient kind, the one that arrives before the refusal. This is private property. Do you have an appointment? Layla said she was there to see Kong Seo Yun. The guard's smile held. This isn't a tourist site. She reached into her notebook. Removed a card, the kind that carries a firm name above a personal one. Placed it on the ledge of the guardhouse window with 2 fingers. Didn't push it. Didn't explain it. Just placed it there and waited. The guard picked it up. Read it. Read it again. His smile dissolved somewhere between the first and second read. He looked at her. Looked back at the card. Then he stepped away from the window and made a phone call with his back turned, his voice too low to carry. When he came back, the gate opened. He didn't make eye contact. She was escorted to the lobby of the main building, a vast, immaculate space with high ceilings and the particular silence of rooms that have been designed to impress rather than welcome. Layla had spent the last 8 months in rooms designed exactly like this one. Different cities, different families, same grammar of power. She knew exactly what it was built to do, and exactly how to dismantle it. A staff member offered her water. She accepted it. She was told someone would be with her shortly. Shortly turned into 45 minutes. This was not an accident. Anyone who had spent time around Seo Yun knew that waiting was a tool she used deliberately. Make them sit. Let the room work on them. Let the silence and the grandeur remind them of the distance between where they are and where you are. By the time you walk in, they're already smaller. Layla did not check her phone. She sat with the water and the notebook and she studied the room. The architecture, the way the building's original structure had been modified, expanded, layered over with renovations that wanted to erase what came before. The staff moving through the edges of the space, quick and eyes down, the particular body language of people who have learned to be invisible to stay comfortable. the artwork on the walls, pieces chosen to signal wealth rather than reflect taste. The way the light fell through the front windows at this hour, and where the cameras were positioned, and which doors had keypad entry versus standard locks. She took no notes during this. She didn't need to. She simply looked. After 45 minutes, a junior assistant appeared and informed her, with a polished apology, that Ms. Kong was unavailable today but would arrange a proper meeting at a suitable time. She would be contacted. Layla smiled, said that was perfectly fine, left her card with the assistant the same way she had left one at the gate. That evening, she found her grandmother. Henny's room was exactly as Layla had imagined it from years of Sunday calls. Small, clean, carefully arranged. The photograph on the wall. The ceramic mug on the windowsill with the small handprint pressed into it from decades ago. Layla's own hand, age 4, on a summer visit she barely remembered, but Henny had never stopped mentioning. They held each other for a long time without speaking. Then Layla pulled back and looked at her grandmother's face. The cheek. The careful, practiced steadiness in Henny's eyes that had clearly been working very hard for a very long time. She didn't say anything about what she saw. She just reached out and held Henny's hand. Later, after Henny had fallen asleep in the chair, Layla found the termination letter on the nightstand. She read it once, all the way through. Then she folded it with clean, deliberate creases and placed it inside her notebook. She stepped into the corridor. Made a call. The screen faced away. The voice on the other end was not identifiable. The conversation was short. "I'm here," Layla said. "Yes. I've seen enough. Let's move forward." She ended the call. Stood in the corridor for a moment. Looked down at the marble floor, the same floor her grandmother had cleaned for years. Then she went back inside and sat beside Henny until morning. What they missed would cost Seo Yun everything. Seo Yun kept Layla waiting a second time. 2 days after the lobby. A formal summons, the word used internally among the staff was actually summons, delivered through the same junior assistant who had handed back a card with a polished apology and a promise of contact. The meeting was scheduled for 11 in the morning. Seo Yun arrived at 11:22. This too was not an accident. The room was a mid-level conference space. Not the boardroom, that would have granted too much significance. Not a casual sitting room either. Somewhere deliberately in between. A table long enough to establish distance. 2 lawyers already seated when Layla arrived, both in dark suits, both with the particular stillness of men paid to be unreadable. Layla sat down across from the empty chair. Placed her notebook on the table. Placed a folder beside it. Folded her hands. Waited. When Seo Yun entered, she did not apologize for the time. She sat down, accepted a coffee from an assistant who materialized and disappeared in the same breath, and looked across the table at Layla the way you look at something you have already decided is not a serious matter. She spoke first. Measured. Almost warm. "I understand your grandmother is emotional about the transition. That's completely natural. Elderly people often struggle with change, particularly when a position has been held for a long time. It can feel like more than it is. I want you to know that we have been extremely generous with her tenure here. The 30 days is a courtesy. Many households wouldn't extend that." She let that land. Then she picked up her coffee. Layla did not respond immediately. She reached forward and placed the folder in the center of the table. Then she pulled her hands back and said nothing. Seo Yun looked at the folder. Looked at Layla. Then she picked it up with the mild curiosity of someone expecting to find a formal complaint or a demand letter, something her lawyers would dismiss in a sentence. She opened it. Scanned the first page. A short breath of a laugh. "What is this supposed to be?" "A starting point," Layla said. The lawyer to Seo Yun's left reached across without being asked. He read. His posture, which had been reclined and comfortable, changed somewhere in the first paragraph. He sat forward. Read the page again. Then he leaned toward Seo Yun and began to speak in a voice too low for the room to carry. Seo Yun's expression did not break. But it flickered. Just once. The way a light flickers when something shifts in the current behind the wall. The lawyer whispered a second time. Longer this time. Layla watched this without expression. Then she gathered her notebook, capped her pen, and stood. "Take your time reviewing it. I'll be at my grandmother's side if you need me." She left the folder on the table and walked out. She took the stairs rather than the elevator. 12 floors. She needed the time. On the 8th landing she stopped. Put her hand flat against the wall. Took one breath. The slow kind. The kind you take when you are not going to take another one like it for a very long time. Her mother had never seen this building. Had never stood in this city. Had spent her whole life not knowing what she had been kept from. Layla had spent 8 months making sure that debt got paid. She wasn't finished yet. She pushed off the wall and kept going. Behind her, the conference room stayed very quiet for a long time. That same afternoon, on the other side of the estate, Henrietta May Collins was doing something she had been putting off for 3 weeks. She was packing 2 suitcases. That was all she had after all those years in that house. All she had chosen to keep, which said something about either the life she'd lived or the woman she was. A folded stack of uniforms she would leave behind. 3 books. A pressed flower between wax paper. A gardenia dried stiff, from an arrangement Raymond had brought her on their last anniversary before he got sick. The ceramic mug with the small handprint. A cardigan that had belonged to her daughter. She worked slowly, not because she was struggling physically, because every object required a decision that was also a kind of goodbye. When Layla returned and stood in the doorway of that small room, she didn't say anything about the meeting. She looked at the suitcases, looked at her grandmother's face, and sat down on the edge of the bed without a word. Henny continued folding. Then she stopped. She reached to the very back of the top shelf of the wardrobe, behind a folded blanket, and removed something that had been sitting there undisturbed for just over 2 years. An envelope. Old. The paper soft at the corners from age and the particular humidity of Seoul winters. The writing on the front was in Korean. She held it for a moment before she handed it to Layla. "The chairman gave me that the week before he passed," Henny said. "He pressed it into my hand himself. He said, 'Henrietta, keep this safe. Give it to the right person when the time comes.'" She paused. "I never knew what was in it. I can't read it. But I've kept it all this time because he asked me to." She looked at her granddaughter. "I think the time is now, baby." Layla took the envelope. Turned it over. The seal had been broken once and carefully repressed. The chairman's own hand, she would later learn, opening it a final time before he gave it away. Making sure it said what he needed it to say. She removed the letter inside. Unfolded it. Read it. She simply read it. All the way through. Then she folded it back along its original creases and placed it with absolute care inside her notebook. "How long have you had this?" she asked quietly. "Since the week he passed," Henny said. "Just over 2 years." Layla nodded once. She looked at the suitcases, at the pressed flower, at the ceramic mug. Then she looked at her grandmother and said, "Stop packing." Henny opened her mouth. "Please," Layla said. "Just that. One word." Henny looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. Then she set down the cardigan she had been holding. And she sat. That letter had been sitting on a shelf in a small room at the end of the East Corridor for just over 2 years. Passed over. Ignored. Completely invisible to the legal team that had spent those same months constructing an airtight succession plan for Kang Seo-yun. It had never been translated. And it was about to change everything. She made one call before she slept. Short. She gave a name, a location, and 3 words. "Start the clock." There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when something irreversible has just been understood. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of weight. Of a door closing that will never open the same way again. That silence fell over a notary office in central Seoul on a Friday morning. And it started with a letter. Layla had requested a neutral third-party notary. Someone with no connection to Kongstar, no history with the Kang family, no reason to slow-walk a translation or choose convenient interpretations. A certified legal translator brought in from outside the city. The process took 4 hours. Layla sat through all of it. What came back was 11 pages. The original letter from the chairman was 3. The remaining 8 were supporting documentation the notary had been asked to verify and authenticate alongside it. Documents Layla had sourced through channels that the folder she had placed on Seo Yun's conference table had only hinted at. The letter began simply. The chairman's handwriting, firm, deliberate, the handwriting of a man who understood that what he was setting down would outlast him. He wrote about Raymond Collins, not as a private aide, which had been the public description, the clean and simple version recorded in employment paperwork. The truth was more foundational than that. Raymond had been Byung-ho's private counsel. The agreements that established the foundational structure Kongstar was still operating under 3 decades later. When those contracts were being negotiated, Raymond Collins had declined payment 3 times. The chairman had pressed. Raymond had declined again. He told Byung-ho that a man who charged for loyalty had neither. And Raymond had carried something else without charging for it. He had raised Diana as his own, knowing whose daughter she was, and had never once asked for recognition, explanation, or relief from the weight of it. Byung-ho had known. He had watched Raymond choose that silence every day for years. It was the thing he could never repay. So Byung-ho made a different kind of promise. A private one, documented, witnessed, and placed in the custody of a law firm in Zurich with instructions that it be held until triggered. The instrument was sealed. It would surface only upon formal presentation of a legal claim, not in routine review, not in estate administration, not in the kind of due diligence Seo Yun's lawyers had run during the transition. It required a claimant to trigger it. Until someone did, it was invisible. The promise was this: that Henrietta Collins and her direct descendants would carry permanent protected status within the Kong family legacy. Not as staff, not as pensioners, as protected bloodline. The language was specific. It had been written by a man who understood exactly what he was writing. But the letter did not stop there. And this is where everything shifted. The chairman wrote about a woman. He did not use her full name in the letter itself, but the supporting documents did. A woman he had loved before his first marriage. Before the company had a name. Before the version of Byung-ho that Seoul knew had fully formed. A relationship that his family had ended with the particular efficiency of people who treat love as a liability. The woman had left Korea. The family had paid her to leave and ensured she did not return. She had been pregnant when she left. The child, a daughter, was born in the United States. Byung-ho had never been permitted to acknowledge her publicly. But he had never stopped knowing she existed. And in the last years of his life, after his second wife had passed, and the company had grown beyond anything he had imagined in those early rooms with Raymond Collins, he had found a way to reach her. Her name was Diana, Henny's daughter, Layla's mother, not Raymond's daughter, though Raymond had loved her as completely as if she were. Diana was Byung-ho's. Henny had not known this while Raymond lived. She would not learn it until after Diana was gone. Which meant the woman who had spent 31 years cleaning those floors was never just staff. She was always family. She just hadn't been told. Diana had carried it quietly, in the way the people in this family seemed always to carry the things that mattered most. The succession codicil was contained in the supporting documents. Registered in Zurich. Triggered automatically at the 2-year mark following the chairman's death if the board had not completed a formal succession vote confirming an heir who met the founding values criteria. A clause Seo Yun's legal team had read as procedural, as standard protective language, as something that sounds significant and means nothing. It was not nothing. It meant that if the vote had not been completed, and it had not, because Seo Yun had spent 18 months positioning herself without ever formally calling the vote, confident that delay served her interests. Then the succession reverted. To the acknowledged bloodline. To Diana's line. To Layla. To the granddaughter of the man who built the company, and the granddaughter of the woman who had spent 31 years cleaning its floors. Layla, a succession lawyer specializing in contested inheritance, had spent the 8 months between her mother's passing and that phone call building a case with the precision of someone who does not move until every piece is exactly where it needs to be. She had found the documents in a box of Diana's things 3 weeks after the funeral. She had understood immediately what they meant, and she had waited until she was certain. The folder she had placed on Seo Yun's conference table was not a complaint. It was not a demand letter. It was a preview, a single page of what was coming, enough to make a lawyer lean over and whisper twice. Not enough to show the full hand. The full hand came on a Monday morning. Layla walked into the Kongstar boardroom in a structured blazer the color of charcoal. No jewelry. Notebook under her arm. She had not announced the meeting herself. The board chairman, a man named Wu who had known Byung-ho for 40 years and had been quietly troubled by Seo Yun's months of procedural delay, had called it after receiving a private briefing the previous evening. Every board member was present. Seo Yun was present. Her 2 lawyers were present. Layla placed the full documentation package on the table. 11 pages from the notary. The Zurich registration confirmation. The succession codicil with its authentication stamps. The supporting genealogical records. Diana's records. The chairman's own letter in both the original Korean and certified English translation. She did not speak first. She let them read. Seo Yun got through the first 2 pages before she stood up. This is absurd. Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. She is nobody. She walked in here from Chicago with a notebook and a dead man's letter, and you are all sitting there treating this like it's. Layla's voice was quiet, completely level. I am the granddaughter of the man who built this company. And I am the granddaughter of the woman your family slapped across the face in a hallway and handed a termination letter with no signature. Both of those things are now legally documented. Both of those things are in front of you right now. The room was very still. Board Chairman Wu had not looked up from the documents since Layla placed them on the table. He read slowly, the way a man reads when the stakes of misunderstanding are too high to risk. He reached the final page. He set it down. He looked up. He looked at Layla. And he nodded. Once. Slowly. One nod. Not the decision, but the one that made the outcome inevitable. And that single nod, that quiet, unhurried, irreversible nod from the man who had known Byung-ho longer than anyone else in that room, it cost Seo Yun everything. The succession charter of Kongstar Holdings had been written by Kong Byung-ho himself in the company's early years. He had been deliberate about it, almost unusually so for a founder at that stage, when most men building something from the ground up are thinking about growth, not governance. But Byung-ho had grown up watching what happened to families when power had no clear path, when ambition had no container. He had seen it destroy people he respected. So he built a structure. And inside that structure, he placed a clause that required an emergency vote to be convened within 48 hours of a valid succession claim being formally presented to the board. The claim was presented on a Monday morning. Its formal presentation triggered an automatic legal freeze on all personnel actions connected to the estate, including the termination notice that had been sitting on Henny's nightstand for 3 weeks. By Monday afternoon, the lawyers had begun. Seo Yun's legal team filed 3 separate procedural challenges before 5 o'clock. Jurisdiction over the Zurich registration. The validity of the genealogical documentation. The interpretation of the founding values criteria in the codicil. By every professional measure, they were excellent lawyers doing exactly what they had been paid to do. It didn't matter. Byung-ho had not registered the codicil quietly or informally. The 2-year trigger was not ambiguous language. It was a countdown, and the countdown had expired 6 weeks before Layla walked through the estate gate. By Tuesday evening, all 3 challenges had been formally dismissed. The vote was scheduled for Wednesday morning. 48 hours. Exactly as the charter required. For the first time in 18 months, Seo Yun didn't control what happened next. It was Tuesday night when Seo Yun found Layla alone. Not in a conference room. Not with lawyers present. In the corridor outside the estate's east wing. The same corridor where the vase had broken, where the silence had fallen, where a 19-year-old housekeeper had pressed both hands over her mouth and tried not to be seen crying. Seo Yun looked different in that corridor without an audience. The precision was still there, the posture, the composed face, but something underneath it had shifted. Something that might have been exhaustion, or something older than that. She spoke first. "You don't know what it took," she said. Not loudly, almost to herself as much as to Layla. After he passed, the board was fractured. 3 of the senior members wanted to bring in an external firm to manage the transition. The company's share price dropped 11% in the first month. There were contracts on the table that needed signatures and no one with the authority to sign them. She paused. "I held it together. 18 months. Whatever you think of me, I held it together." The corridor was quiet. Layla looked at her for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, no satisfaction, nothing that could be mistaken for victory. "And you don't know what it took for my grandmother to hold herself together in your hallway for 31 years. She let that sit exactly as long as it needed to. I'm not your enemy, Seo-yun. What you did for this company, that's real. It will be part of the record. I won't erase it. A beat. But I will not let what happened to her go unanswered. Not the letter on the floor. Not the dinners. Not the hallway. None of it." Seo-yun said nothing. Layla walked past her toward the east corridor. Neither of them looked back. Wednesday morning. The full board convened at 9 o'clock. The vote took 11 minutes. Layla Collins was ratified as successor CEO of Kongstar Holdings by a margin of 9 votes to 2. The 2 dissenting votes were both from members appointed during Seo-yun's acting tenure, a detail that was noted in the minutes and would not be forgotten. Seo-yun retained a minority board seat. The charter permitted it, and Layla did not move to remove it. A removed seat becomes a grievance, a legal challenge, a narrative. A retained seat with dissolved authority is something quieter. And in the architecture of power, quiet is often more effective than loud. But the board attached a condition to Seo-yun's continued seat. Non-negotiable. Proposed by Chairman Wu and seconded before he had finished the sentence. A formal written apology to Henrietta May Collins. Personally signed. Delivered in person. Seo-yun's lawyer leaned over and spoke to her for approximately 90 seconds. She listened without expression. Then she picked up the pen. She signed it stiffly, with the careful control of a woman ensuring that nothing in her hand would betray what was happening in the rest of her. But she signed it. Every page. Her full name. Later that afternoon, in a small office that had been set up as Layla's temporary working space, a single piece of paper was fed into a shredder. The termination letter. Reference number and legal department stamp and all. No ceremony. No speech. Layla fed it through herself alone and watched it go. There was one more thing. Among Layla's first official acts as ratified successor, before the formal transition paperwork had even been fully processed, she requested the personnel file of every household staff member currently employed at the Kong estate. She reviewed them personally. There was a file for a young woman, 19 years old, 3 months of employment, no disciplinary record, commendations from the head housekeeper for reliability and care. Her name was Soare. She was the junior housekeeper who had stood in the corridor on a Tuesday morning in March and pressed both hands over her mouth and cried silently because she was 19 and she had just watched something happen that she could not stop and could not unsee. Layla had her brought in. She told Soare directly, no preamble, no performance, that she was being appointed head of household, effective immediately, that her salary would reflect the role, that her opinion on the running of the estate would be sought and respected, and that she had not been forgotten. Soare stood very still for a moment. Then she bowed deeply. Layla nodded, thanked her, and returned to work. There was still one thing left to do. Not for the company. For Henny. Layla had found an apartment. It was 12 minutes from the estate by car. 7th floor. Corner unit. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the south side that caught the late afternoon light in a way that turned the whole room amber for about 40 minutes every evening. A small balcony that looked out over the city, not the corporate skyline, but the residential layers of Seoul, the streets and rooftops and the low persistent hum of a city that had been living and breathing long before Kongstar existed and would continue long after. She had furnished it carefully, warmly, bookshelves, a proper kitchen, a reading chair by the south window. and on the front door in clean, simple lettering, Henrietta M. Collins. Her name. On the door. Henny stood in front of that door for a long time before she went inside. When she did, she walked through the room slowly, touched the back of the reading chair, looked at the bookshelves, stood at the south window and watched the light. Then she turned to Layla and said exactly what Layla had known she would say. "I don't need all this, baby." Layla had been ready for it. "Grandma." Her voice was steady and quiet. "You gave this family everything they took from you. Your mornings, your evenings, your grief, your labor. You gave them Raymond's legacy without ever knowing that's what you were doing." She paused. "Let this family finally give something back." Henny looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. A look that contained an entire conversation, argument and surrender and love, and something that has no clean word for it, the feeling of being seen after a very long time of being looked past. She didn't say anything else. She set the ceramic mug, the one with the small handprint, the one she had packed and unpacked and carried through all those years, on the windowsill where the light would reach it. And she sat down in the reading chair. The formal ceremony was small. Private. No press. No choreographed moment for external consumption. The Kong Star board convened in the Heritage Hall, a room on the ground floor of the main building that had always contained the company's founding history in photographs and documents, and the particular reverence that institutions reserve for their own mythology. Chairman Wu presided. Every board member attended by choice, not requirement. A framed portrait was unveiled. Raymond Collins. A photograph taken in the early years. Young, composed, standing in what appeared to be an office that no longer existed, looking directly at the camera with the expression of a man who understood the weight of what he was part of. Beneath the portrait, a small plaque. His name, his years of service, and a single line that Layla had written herself and submitted to the board without explanation or justification. The foundation was built on his word. Henny sat in the front row. She wore a deep blue dress she had bought for the occasion, the first thing she had bought for herself in a very long time that wasn't practical. She looked at the portrait for a long time. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was composed, dignified, giving nothing away to the room. But her eyes were full, and she let them be. Her first official act as Successor CEO was 4 sentences long. It went to every employee at every level. It said that all staff were to be addressed by their names, always, without exception. Not a courtesy, a standard. The evening of the day the portrait was unveiled, Layla went to the apartment. Henny was on the balcony. The city was settling into dusk. That particular hour in Seoul when the light goes low and warm and the skyline holds it for a few minutes before the dark comes in. Henny was in the chair Layla had put out there, the one with the wide armrests, the one built for sitting in without any particular agenda. She was holding the ceramic mug, both hands wrapped around it the way you hold something not for warmth, but for the weight of it, for the familiar solid fact of it in your hands. Layla came and sat beside her. For a while neither of them spoke. The city moved below them. Somewhere in the middle distance a church bell marked the hour. The light shifted slowly from amber to something softer. Then Henny said, quietly, to the city rather than to Layla, "Your mother would have loved this city." Layla looked out at the skyline, at the streets below, at the layers of a place that had held her family's history. All of it, the beautiful and the painful and the hidden and the found, long before she had known to look for it. She reached over and took her grandmother's hand. Neither of them spoke again. The light went soft. The city carried on. And they sat there together, the woman who had stayed for 31 years and the woman who had come when she was needed, above a city that had finally, at the end of a very long road, given them both their names back. 31 years of silence. 31 years of service. 31 years of a woman making herself small in hallways she had cleaned with her own hands, in a house that had taken everything she offered and called it ordinary. Power can be inherited, but dignity? Dignity has to be chosen. Every single day. If you were Layla, would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments.